No, this is going to be an interesting video. It's probably something that you haven't heard about what's happening in the world economy and stuff like that. Most people are sort of panicking. They're looking at people selling off Bitcoin, selling off this, selling off that, dumping US bonds, and then there's a whole lot of other people buying them. So it's just like mayhem and nobody knows what they're trying to do. Okay. You've got to get in Donald Trump's head. And he's a bit of a Machiavellian, so the way he operates isn't like most people out there. Most people follow what I call traditional bullshit economics. They think basically that they still live in a barter economy. That's what they teach at university. So pretty much nonsense. We don't live in a barter economy. Capitalist system isn't a perfect system. No system is a perfect system. It's probably the best system we've ever invented, but it's an imperfect of the best systems that we've ever invented. It's an unstable system. It can create stupendous wealth, but it can also create a lot of crises, one after the other, because of the overexuberance of the markets. People are humans. Humans not always act in their best interests. Sometimes they are influenced by the animal spirits, as they call it, and so can overcorrect or over this or that, whatever. Now, what have they been trying? The previous government, the Biden administration, had been trying very, very hard to bring down inflation. Was it working? No, it was failing. All it was doing is basically ramping up interest rates, ramping up interest rates, ramping up interest rates, and failing, because this wasn't an inflation of a traditional sort. This was an inflation due to expensive energy. Now, we know I've talked about before the contributing factors like the underinvestment in hydrocarbons, the green new bullshit, and all these other things that have sort of amplified the situation, all that, and made things worse. The war, um, the Biden war on Russia didn't really help. Um, they practically had a peace deal. The Ukrainians with the Minsk agreements and some of the other meetings that they had in Ankara, in Constantinople's, Istanbul, for some of you, I'll call it by the name that I feel happy with. And pretty much it didn't really get sorted, because there were globalist interests that wanted this war. So that's another factor that actually caused a lot of these problems. I mean, the Russians got around with, in a sort of a nefarious way. What they did was, which was a smart tactic. You probably haven't heard this as well. I think I may have mentioned it in one of my live streams, but that's about it. Where what they did was they pretty much sold it below the price that the Europeans were demanding that it be sold. And what they did was they put it on their ships and they charged a higher transport cost. They got the money at the market rate. They just basically put a bigger transport cost on it. So it still worked. And they were able to circumvent the so-called sanctions. And remember, I was telling you that the Greek Navy was protecting, some ship owners, Greek ship owners, in the southwest of the Peloponnese, and let's say transferring oil. Oh, that was very costly, that transport cost. But anyway, that's what was happening, those sort of things. But all these things were, sending it to India and all that, were creating bottlenecks. And the markets were, because the markets are not aware of the so-called illegal activities that are happening. And so because they're not up to that, they look at sort of the key data points, and that's how they respond. And so they were pushing up the oil price continuously. And at the same time, Biden didn't really help himself by pissing off the Arabs and them, not being as cooperative. And so he kept on just pushing up interest rates to try and all it was doing is killing the Western economies. That's what it was doing. Now, what did Trump realise? When Trump came out, he realised he had to bust this system up. And that's what he's done. And people have not understood what he's done because they're just not as smart or bright to understand what he's actually done. He's come in and basically put a big spanner in the system and upended it, just flipped it. Look at oil prices, how low they are. Look at the value of the US dollar against certain currencies. He's actually managed to push down the oil price, push down the US currency to basically make US more competitive, hold up the currencies of the emerging economies, making the inputs that are coming into the US by them, having their currency going down against the US dollar, or the developed countries going the other way. I mean, the guy's a magician, but he's actually achieved it by a strategy. I'll show you shortly. I'll share my screen, and most people have not picked up on it. Everybody's out there disagreeing with him or arguing against him, criticising him and all that. But guess what? Both the Fed and the ECB, whether they effing like it or not, he's basically stuck a big spanner up their ass and basically is going to force them to lower interest rates. Now, not anybody else. And he's lowered the real underlying inflation issue going forward. So while everybody's cutting their throats and dumping things and running for the hills, it's a great buying opportunity for the smart people out there that realise that these fools have basically shot themselves in the foot, because that's exactly what they have done. So let's just go through some of the stuff, and then I'll basically start giving you my views about how things are going to play out. And let me share my screen. Okay, so if you go and look at the CNN Business on the fear and greed, it's useful in a normal market where things are just, going through your normal, a non-Trump market. This site can be useful, the CNN Business site. The sort of not a couple of days ago, the fear level was down to 4, so it was extreme fear. They were basically literally burning their bras and burning their knickers. So this just tells you just general stuff. Looking at the market momentum, that tells you a lot. So when you're looking at this S&P 500, or the drop, sort of come back and flatlined at that level, because they don't really know what's happening. So they're really desperately trying to work out, is this going down? Remember, when you look at these sort of things, in a typical downturn, which has got momentum, like a real crisis that's got momentum, what do we notice? In a real crisis, we notice this collapse and then recovery, then big collapse that comes right after very quickly. And if you don't get out then, you're fucked. So that's really what usually happens. This is not what's happening. They can't make sense of it. If you take a look, there's still, even though if you look at consumer sentiment, it's gone down, but consumer purchasing hasn't. It's sort of flatlined, but it hasn't gone down. It dipped a while back, but it's sort of recovered again. And that was, because people are uncertain, about their jobs and stuff like that. Now they just don't know what to make of it. It's like everybody's on a holding pattern in a sense. If Trump works this one out in the way he wants to work it out, he's trying to basically devalue the US dollar against all the major currencies, while at the same time strengthening the dollar against the emerging economies, who are the key suppliers of cheap inputs into the US economy. Do you see the logic? And you'll actually see that when you're looking at the currencies, like the Australian dollar. Being an advanced economy, the US dollar has dropped against it. So when you look, you look at Bangladesh, it's gone the other way. So all the emerging economies, it's going the other way. So you got to look at all the details to understand. The Azerbaijani is just flatlined. That's a really funny one. When I actually looked at that, I go, oh, yeah, they're just providing energy. They just basically do nothing else, so they're not going to be really affected at all. So a pure energy producer, and that's their core stuff. You're not going to see it all that. Look at the Canadian dollar. The Canadians just basically, for the Canadians, their energy just became cheaper. Okay. We'll look at the repo market. Look at this. The oil price went from 70 odd all the way down to 60 odd. Okay. So $72.28. Oops. So $11.61 dollars. That's a 16% reduction. 16% reduction in your energy costs for everyone in Europe and many other places. 61%. You add to that the devaluation. Remember, they are buying in US dollars. Canadian. Let's take a look at the euro. They're buying their crude energy. They're buying oil in US dollars. What just happened? They got a 16%. They got a reduction as well in their cost of energy in terms of US dollars, which they're purchasing. So they need less US dollars to buy the same amount of petrol. Got it? Plus it's been reduced. He just gave them the entire Europe, Australia, Europe. Remember, Australia's requires a lot of energy for its, not only for its manufacturing, but its agriculture and its production of getting stuff out of the ground. Australia just basically, its cost of doing business just went down. The cost in Europe just went down. The cost in Canada just went down. The cost everywhere just went down, both in terms of oil and him devaluing the US dollar. Voila. Okay. So he gave them a major reduction in that regard. By his tactics, he's been trying to not lose. Remember, on markets, the bond market is acting weird. It spooked Trump. It hasn't spooked Trump. It's spooked every other idiot out there. Trump knows what he's doing. He's spooked them. They got the whole story the wrong way, but what do you expect from CNN? The truth is always the reverse. Always think whatever CNN says, it's the reverse. US Treasury 10-year note auction outcome shows strong demand. 6 days ago, strong demand. I don't see basically everybody running out of US Treasuries. Do you? Do you see everybody running out of US, out of the dollar? The US, the world is de-dollarizing, I hear. Really? Then why are so many people running into stuff like that? Now, people say, well, a lot of people are selling US bonds. Yeah, but there's a lot of people buying them as well. Okay? Why aren't you checking the other side? The demand is strong on the other side for the purchasing. Now, why is gold's probably, silver's come down. Silver's come down. Bitcoin sort of, it's the normal thing with Bitcoin. It's a bit all over the place. Yips. So Bitcoin's all over the place, as you can see, 131. It's down to, it's basically been going nowhere. It's come down, it's been going nowhere. In the last month, it dipped massively here. It's come off 139, but it's been within far lower at 135. It's been going nowhere. It's just been basically sitting there. But there was a bit of a dip here, and I suspect that dip happened because people were scared. They could have had margin calls because they'd actually borrowed to invest, and they were basically shitting themselves that if things went south, they're going to lose everything. So they were dumping Bitcoin, dumping gold for a period of time, especially dumping a lot of silver because it's an industrial thing. And if silver can lose value even faster because you've got the situation where with a silver price that, it's an industrial commodity as well. So if the economy is going to go south and people are not going to use it, that is, an issue in that regard. And so you saw there was this big dip, about 34, down to about 30 odd. It's sort of recovered halfway. That's, sort of recovered about halfway, which is close to, some of the older averages and all that. So it hasn't lost a lot. That was the initial scare. And you can actually see from the VIX dipped, went up, dipped, came up again, and it's actually gone down again. So from 50 odd down to 30 odd, 20 and below, usually about the general situation about 20. So it's somewhere, halfway between where it was before and where it is sort of now, more or less. So that's, the sort of volatility that exists in the system and all that. Pretty much when they say it's acting weird and they are confused, they are spooked, and they don't understand why it's acting the way it's acting. What Trump's trying to do is he's basically just achieved something that no other president has in the past. He's basically managed to increase, because remember, everybody was telling us the euro was going to parity. Every expert out there was saying the euro is going to parity. I don't see that as a parity. It's, it hasn't fallen off a cliff, but, in terms of this is a substantial change in direction, because these are currencies and these are big economies, and you're not going to get like massive changes. When you go 10 cents difference, well, it's only a couple of cents, but you know what I mean? You go a certain amount of difference, that's about halfway, about three. That's quite a big difference between where it was. And up here, it was where it was earlier. And it's come from these highs of, 98 all the way down to 88. This is the Trump effect of 10. I mean, that's over a year. Over a month, it's less, but it's been going down, which means that the American dollar is depreciating, but not losing. Remember, there's demand for US treasuries, but the currency is going in the other direction. So the Europeans got a big boost to their economy, cheaper energy. Now, how did he achieve this? Well, he actually went and did a bit of a deal with the Saudis. Didn't tell anyone, but he did a deal. And what did the Saudis do? They pumped out more oil. Maybe the deal was, can you weaken Iran for us? Because the Saudis and the Emiratis are quite hostile to Qatar and Iran, if you haven't worked that out. Okay? So, there's always lobbying between the Qataris and the Saudis against each other in America. So obviously you want a deal, Mr. Trump, give us something. So these are sort of things that are happening in the background, the geopolitical things that are happening in the background. Okay? So Trump can't get everything his way, but obviously he's definitely done a deal. The full deal, who knows what it entails. There may be other elements to it. There's a possibility of, a pipeline deal. I'm not going to go into that. That's for another video, on the other channel, the opinions one, which I'll do on that. So if you unsubscribe to the other one, why the hell aren't you? You should be basically subscribed to learn a few things about geopolitics and how the world really, really works. Not how people tell you it works, but how it really works. Okay? There's a lot of wheeling and dealing in the background and a lot of, things that politicians who think they're gods, and I'm not talking about only Trump, I'm talking about the previous ones, they think they can manipulate the world. The difference is there are some that are smarter and know how to do it much better than others. There's your difference. So for my dear friends, the libertarian free marketeers, the world doesn't operate in your way. It hasn't for ever. It never has. There has never been a total free market. As long as humans exist, they will manipulate things, whether it's government organisations like globalist organisations or whatever, they will do that. Even if you were to get rid of governments, people will establish cartels or groups or whatever to manipulate it in their interests. It's just human. That's why you can't have a perfect system of any sort. because humans can't be controlled unless you put a chip in them. Oh, that's right. The globalists are trying that, aren't they? Oh, maybe they'll succeed one day, you know, and the AI God will actually control us all. Hopefully not. But until that sort of happens, so when we look at that, let's look at the, you know, these are big economies. We need to look at big economies. Indonesia. Oops. Oh, why isn't that working? That really annoys me. Look at the Japanese yen, okay? Japanese yen down as well, which is what he wants to do. He wants to push these other currencies up against the US dollar to make US products more competitive. But he's also giving them a reduction in their energy costs because now they are purchasing in US dollars a whole lot of oil. So they're getting a discount. The US has a lot of its own domestic oil. So for them, it's less of an issue. You know, it's more a market-based pricing rather than, you know, they have good production internally. So the Texas intermediary price will come down, like Brent has come down and all the others. So let's go back to, let's see whether we can get it. No, it doesn't want to. Got it. There you go. Iranian, the other way. Because Iranian is not only fuel, they do have a more mixed economy compared to the Azeris. This is ridiculous. Let's see if I refresh it, whether I can do it. No, it does not want to do it under any circumstances. Okay, let's just some of the other currencies. I looked at it before, and anyway, it's gone up against the US dollar as well. So that means commodities, products from places like Surabaya, places like that, where there's a lot of an industrial zone, and they export stuff to the US. The stuff that they're exporting is going to be cheaper for the Americans. That means they're getting cheaper energy and cheaper inputs from emerging economies. Pakistan, more or less flatlined, but they don't have much of an economy. The Thai baht's gone down. That's interesting. But oops. It's not going to work. Why isn't this working? Uh, ain't going to work. Anyway, I'll, that's not going to work. I'm not going to stick to that. Now, I'm not going to bother with the actual overnight repo, which is the rate that's come down the last couple of days. Went up initially, but now it's coming down. So the less panicking. So there's less of a panic. The sort of, oh, this is a weird market. So yeah, it's sort of come down back to where it was in January, more or less. So there's slightly less panic out there. Everybody's not certain about where things are going. So your repo rate is pretty much, the what the US sort of charges the banks, in a sense. Um, so that's really what that is. We'll look at the actual DX chart, that's dropped in that regard. And that just demonstrates the difference between the other developed economies and the US. Okay, so the DXY, people call it that it's the US, it's the euro dollar, but it's not exactly the euro dollar index. It's sort of obviously the DXY. About 58% is the European economies. The currency is sort of a basket in that regard. And, you know, and as you can see, why isn't this working? You've got a whole lot of these sort of indexes for anyone who's into trading with currencies and stuff like that. So we've covered all that in that regard. We're not going to worry about the trade weighted index. I'm not going to go into that. I will go to this one. So, what's influencing Trump? Well, this guy, a user guide to restructuring the global trading system. And this guy's, I'm not going to go into all of it. It'll be for another video about tariffs, using currency policy. We've seen the effect. This guy, Stefan Miran, he's basically currently serving as chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors. Previously, he worked as an advisor for the Treasury. So he's basically a key advisor for Trump. And this guy, the Stefan guy, he's actually, provided Trump with the sort of policy tools and framework to achieve what Trump's trying to do. So let me stop sharing. I don't need to share. Okay, so went on the other screen. I dragged it over there accidentally. Anyway, so what Trump is trying to do is trying to reset the global system. What he's trying to also achieve is another Bretton Woods conference where he can sit down everyone and basically say, this is the deal. This is how we're going to reset the world economy. So, and I did forget on the price, one important one, just to show you as well. Let me just temporarily share again. Sorry for that. Again, my China, the yuan. See that? China's actually, the yuan is acting very similar to the other emerging economies. Okay? The US dollar is becoming slightly stronger against the Chinese. So are the Chinese being penalized by the Americans? No, because Trump recognizes that China still provides a lot of commodities, a lot of, like rare earths and many other things to the US economy. So, what he wants to do is make the Western countries a bit more competitive so he can sell to them because he's devalued his currency against the rest of the West, but not against the East. The East, he's appreciated his currency against the East. So in a bizarre way, he's basically set up the world currency. Remember this guy, Stefan, about currency policies and multilateral and unilateral agreements? What's he trying to do? He's manipulating the currency. He's the first president in the modern era. There has happened before, but in the modern era, the first president who's deliberately manipulating the US currency. Got it? He's basically allowing the countries that are basically exporting to him the things that he needs to keep prices down in the US and keep inflation down long term. He's playing a long game, while on the other hand, he's lowering his currency against all the other developed economies. So he can competitively sell into their markets. Reverse Robin Hood, if you want to call it. And on the other hand, what he's also doing, he's basically going, here you go, I'm giving you some free, cheaper energy and a lower dollar to buy it with. So it costs you less dollars to buy in order to get your energy. So you add the US currency thing, it's anywhere between, the next couple of months, it'll be anywhere between 20 and 18 and 20% reduction in their cost of getting this energy. Is that going to help Europe? Bloody hell it will. Anybody getting a reduction in energy of that sort is going to help them. The same thing everywhere else. But also it's putting pressure on Russia because, so he can basically get a deal there as well. So there's a whole lot of things that string together in this whole approach of Trump. Now, I'm not saying that he's basically necessarily going to get it all right. No. Could people over panic? There's always a potential. Could things go haywire? There's always a potential. But there's also, things are not completely off the rails. And I don't see like big indicators. There's still demand there. But what he's achieved, another thing is, there was resistance by the Fed and resistance by the ECB to lower interest rates. Now he's forcing them because they're scared. He's not going to tell them his game plan because he wants them to fear. So they respond by lowering interest rates. I mean, they've been jacking up interest rates 11 times in the last couple of years and achieved nothing other than basically slow down the world economy and really stuff up everyone and make everyone poorer, except the bankers. Now, the only people that are worried and cursing Trump are the bankers. But who cares about the bankers? They're a pack of bees, you know what I mean? So That's really what's been happening. And that's what Trump's strategy is, to change the situation within the US, within the emerging markets, and within the other Western developed markets, including Japan and South Korea and stuff like that. So it's a very interesting strategy. He's giving them relief while basically also indirectly, because, you know, they import less stuff from America and, you know, but they export a lot of stuff. So, you know, he can get cheap stuff. They can sell more stuff. You get it? And so there's that sort of way, and he's trying to negotiate, like using tariffs to manipulate and force people into new agreements, but also into new trade agreements. The other thing is he basically wants to pull apart EU negotiations. He doesn't want to negotiate with the EU. And you can see that with some of the other strategies that he's used to negotiate with some of the European countries, by pulling apart and just ignoring NATO, ignoring these things, and just saying, I'm going to make private deals with you, agreements. And if you don't like it, tough. And so he's going to force, like there's already been, you know, like Italy's sort of moved in that way, Greece a bit. You know, you've got Israel, for instance, that went tariff free and did and made some moves. So there's a lot of those sort of things that are happening, these sort of deals. And to a large extent, America had much lower tariffs against other countries, and these countries had massive ones. I mean, I think it was on, was it, I can't remember now, chicken product or pork, where the Canadians had something like 216%. You know, it was just like massive, ridiculous in that regard. So, you know, you want access to our markets, we want access to your markets. From a purely American perspective, I don't blame him. You know, from as an Australian or and a Greek, I'm a dual national, from that side of things, you know, I'm going, oh, bloody hell, you know, are the Americans going to get too much out of these deals? So, you know, on the other side, you got to be honest about these things. I'm just trying to tell you what he's trying to do. You know, is he fulfilling his obligations to the American electorate that voted him? Yes. Is he doing it in a way that is pleasant? No. But you can't actually alter these things, like flip them on their heads by being nice about it or telling people you're going to do it, because they'll try and work against you. But if you basically do a whole lot of things which they're confused, they are spooked and confused, you know, you can insert a lot of things and manipulate all of things in the backgrounds, doing special deals with the Saudis, because energy's as I've said, the energy potentiality of a system is energy. You know, that determines the cost of producing goods and services, period. You know, it's always energy, has been, from animal power, that's why we call it horsepower, from animal power all the way to crude oil and nuclear power and all that. That determines, you know, the cost of doing things in a society. Even Bill Gates had to realise that and started investing in nuclear industry for his data centres, because he knows it's energy. You can't make money without cheap energy. Idiot. So, you know, you don't hear him pronouncing as many anti-nuclear, you know, sort of environmental nonsense that he did in the past. Well, because he knows it'll lose him money, you know. So, you know, virtual signaling can only pay so many bills. After that, it can cost you a lot of money. And he's just sort of realised it to some extent. Doesn't mean he's changed, but he has realised a few things. What Trump is doing is trying to shift the world into a new agreement. So, a future video that I will be making on the other channel. You bigots that haven't actually subscribed to it, why haven't you? The Harry Sopanos Opinions. That is where I will cover this in a future video, and I will also cover some other things that are happening that I don't use my Prime channel, which is for, nutritional, new health stuff, carnivory and stuff like that. This is just so I can whet your appetite and hopefully get you over to the other damn channel so you can learn a few more things about the world and maybe make some smarter investment decisions as well from that knowledge, the geopolitical knowledge and the economic knowledge. So, as long as others are panicking and things are becoming cheaper, there are buying opportunities. Now, this is not financial advice. I'm giving you my opinion on what Trump is doing and how and what he's aiming to achieve. Okay? Is he going to pull it off? I think so. Can I be 100% certain? No. Could it go pear-shaped? Potentially. Remember, we were heading for a recession anyway, and it was going to be just basically had the other party got in, they'd just be jacking up interest rates until eventually they stuffed the system and blew a head gasket and went into complete and utter recession. Are the signs of recession there? Some are, some aren't. It's hard to say. If Trump can pull it off, because he knows the risks, he knows the problems, he knows that he had to bring he had to force the Fed to bring interest rates down, and by doing this, lowering energy cost, which lowers inflation, lowering basically the US dollar against his competitors, he can sell more things, and so bring in more wealth. But at the same time, his inputs, which are coming from the emerging economies, remember, the inputs, his currency is going up against them. So he can get the commodities cheaper, which means he can get the commodities cheaper and the higher and the products that the US produces, like F-35 fighters and whatever else, will be cheaper for the people that he's selling them to. Got it? So he's lowering the inflation in the US economy by lowering the cost of inputs, energy, and commodities that are coming in from emerging economies and stuff like that. Other products that are going to end up in Walmart are going to be cheaper as well. Okay? So your little trinkets and all that, you know who you are who buy these things, are going to be cheaper. And at the same time, so, the general CPI, the Consumer Price Index, will come down. So that will actually increase confidence in the US economy. If you take a look, the trending, last year it was 1.86, I think it was, $1 trillion in terms of trade, exports of the US. The year before, sorry. Last year, it was over $2 trillion. So it's been going up. And, it should continue trending upwards now that the US industries are going to become more competitive. Cheaper energy, cheaper inputs from emerging economies, and a more competitive currency. Okay? All they need now is the Fed to be spooked. It's not Trump who's spooked, it's the Fed and the ECB to lower interest rates. And then we can all party. Got it? So that's what he's trying to do. And the others are burning their bras and knickers and whatever else. But that's good, because they're burning their bras and knickers. They'll be cheap on the market. There'll be cheap stuff to buy in the following months, won't there? For smart investors, there will be. For dumb people that are going to wait until they see the boom come, they're going to get less of a money opportunity. Let's put it that way. So that's what he's trying to do. In my personal opinion, this is not financial advice. This is my personal opinion of appraising exactly what Trump's trying to do and where he's going. So if you agree with me, give me a like. Definitely give me a like. Blow me a kiss. Do anything. Don't tell Ted because he may do something nasty to me. Yes. Anyway, I'll leave it at that. I hope you enjoyed this take and an exploration into Trump's mind, and understanding the beast they call the MAGA beast. Anyway, see yous.